Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. First of all, right off the bat, some good news. Anna Korchneva, the Ukrainian journalist held prisoner in danger of her life for the best part of 3 or 4 months by Syrian death squads, the kidnappers, the destroyers of civilization in Syria, wanted $50 million, then they were down to $5 million, then they came down to $300,000. It's not known how that eventually worked out. But the important thing is that Anna Korchneva was able to get back to Kiev in the Ukraine and then on to Moscow, where I understand she is now. And if we can solve the problem of getting a translation, we hope to hear from her maybe in next week's program. But the point is that's a defeat for the death squad movement over there. These are NATO-controlled death squads, needless to say, run by the CIA and the State Department, whatever they claim. And therefore, their entire racket has been exposed and to some extent defeated. Now, we want to talk quite a bit about the Middle East, what with Obama being over there, and above all, his top handler, Ben Rhodes, the destabilizer of Syria, the guy who designed the attack on Syria of last June and July, the guy with the fake television networks. And I understand Ben Rhodes' brother is the head of NBC News. Can that be true? The Progressive Network, and they work with an imperialist destabilizer in the Obama White House. But let's look, first of all, at the other wing of the Obama White House, if you will, which is old Tom Donilon. And we want to continue to savor the fact that Tom Donilon, the head of the National Security Council under Barkey, has been defeated in his little project, which was to seize control of the Roman papacy, and the vehicle for that was Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston with his campaign manager, Cardinal Terence Dolan of New York City, plus the entire phalanx of U.S. cardinals over there in Rome, meeting and having special press conferences and attempting to stampede the conclave. Well, the attempt to stampede the conclave has failed, and now we have someone who decidedly not the CIA candidate, not the State Department candidate, and that is Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Cardinal of Buenos Aires, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the son of an Italian railway worker who emigrated from the Turin region, Piedmont, northwest Italy, over to Argentina at many years ago, at the beginning of the century. So, what's the response to this? I mean, I think it's important to hold on to the fact, again, that the CIA wanted either one of their own. They wanted Sean O'Malley or Dolan or somebody of this ilk. They were, of course, under a cloud because their guy Mahoney of Los Angeles had been nailed in new cover-ups of child molestation. They were also hurt by the fact that one of the Anglo-American cardinals, the cardinal up there in Scotland, O'Brien, I think his name was, had actually been forced out for sexual hanky-panky and what have you. So there was also the fallback option for the CIA was somebody like Cardinal Schönborn of Vienna, a European oligarch, a Eurogarch, who would have come on the scene as a church reformer. But instead, you have Bergoglio. Now, I gave you some of the background last time, in some detail at least. I want to just revisit this area because the main headline for us here is Bergoglio is strongly associated with the October 2011 call of the Pontifical Council on Justice and Peace. This is the so-called Justitia et Pax in the Vatican. Justitia et Pax was founded by Paul VI Montini back in the late 60s, and it was the organism supposed to implement, to carry out the recommendations for world pacification through world economic development, which were embodied in that landmark encyclical Populorum Progressio of 1967. Now, by the time we got to the European derivatives panic of 2010, 2011, right? We're, of course, talking about the world depression, which began in London and New York as a derivatives panic based on collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, structured investment vehicles, other derivatives, started in 07, 08 in Britain, really, Northern Rock, U.S. then with Countrywide Bank, other events, other companies going bankrupt. But then, of course, it kicked over into Europe, and, of course, it didn't kick over automatically, but it was deliberately exported by things like the Idea Dinner at Moness, Crespi, and Hart in the early spring of 2010, late winter. So the Pontifical Commission Council on Justice and Peace responded to the European crisis in October 2011. And this, according to Carlos Burgueño of the Argentine business newspaper Ámbito Financiero, Bergoglio, in terms of Argentine public opinion, is heavily identified with this document. So at the point where I think we're justified in saying, even though Bergoglio did not sign, he was not one of the cardinals who were directly involved in drawing up the document that we're talking about, the October 2011 paper from Justice and Peace in the Vatican. He is heavily associated with this. These are basically his ideas, and we can, I hope, to some extent look at this as a program for the pontificate. What's he going to do, right? Forget this stuff about, the sexual morality business. This has been hashed out on all sides. But now we have to get to the big issues. How do you stop the scourges of mankind? Show us your faith through your works. Charity. That means stop wars, stop depression, stop starvation, stop world poverty. Those are the commandments that you got to be carrying out, right? Love God, love your neighbor. What does love your neighbor mean? Well, it means do these things. No more wars, no more depressions, no more genocide, especially when it's so easily avoidable. So Bergoglio had been saying into 2010, 2011 that he was essentially a critic of the IMF. Carlos Burgueño of Ámbito Financiero, Buenos Aires, says that Bergoglio is anti-liberal. He's against liberal economics. He's against the classical Ricardo school and the monetarist school and the Austrian school. Anti-liberal. He's a tough critic of the International Monetary Fund and of the policies of adjustment. Adjustment means genocidal austerity, killer cuts. He is a defender of the process of debt restructuring. Debt restructuring means debt moratorium, haircuts, crew cuts, baldies for the bondholders. So the relevant statement here is this paper from Justice and Peace. Let's see if we get you the name of it. It's called Towards Reforming the International Financial and Monetary Systems in the Context of Global Public Authority. In other words, what reforms have to be made in the international monetary system, given the fact that you have the IMF, the World Bank, and these regional development banks. So this, I think, is something we can look at as the program. And the headline is, the new Pope supports the Wall Street sales tax. He supports the Euro-Tobin. He wants financial fat cat transactions tax. We'll be back in a minute. In D.C., we are celebrating the freedom of Anna Kochneva, Ukrainian journalist freed from the death squads of Syria, and make them pay the political price. Rub that in the face of Kerry, of Fabius, of Haig, of this Terzi di Sant'Agata, of Westerwelle, and the rest of this gang, that they're supporting terrorism with those Syrian rebels that they love so much. Anyway, now, the Vatican document, Justice and Peace Council, October 2011, towards reforming the international financial and monetary systems in the context of global public authority. So this is theoretically drawn up by Turkson, the cardinal from Ghana, and of course, he can make important contributions. My stricture was nobody from an English-speaking U.S. or British or formerly British-controlled Commonwealth or Empire country. All of those were ruled out, but that, of course, still allows ample margin for doing a lot of good things. The Burgueño, again, says that as worldwide recognized church representative and leader of the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace, Bergoglio signed, along with his Ghanaian fellow Cardinal Peter Turkson, in 2011, the Vatican's harsh document against adjustment policies, again, genocidal austerity, that were beginning to be applied to the European countries in economic crisis. So here, what do they say? First of all, what is responsible for the depression? Council on Justice and Peace with Bergoglio prominently in the background. They blamed the 2008 world financial panic on the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, and this comes from, quote, a liberalist approach, or neoliberal, we might say, a liberalist approach unsympathetic towards public intervention in the markets, which chose, quote, chose to allow an important international financial institution to fall into bankruptcy on the assumption that this would contain the crisis and its effects, close quotes. The root problem, therefore, they say, is, quote, an economic liberalism that spurns rules and controls. Now, this is the Ron Paul, Rand Paul approach. This is the Republican approach. If you've got a depression, the liquidationist school, right, Andrew Mellon, liquidate stocks, liquidate bonds, liquidate labor, liquidate the farmer, liquidate real estate, liquidate, and then you'll get a recovery. Those who are not dead may have the luck of seeing a recovery before too many decades go by. But that's not what the Vatican says. They're basically repudiating that lunatic Austrian Schumpeterian Rand Paul point of view. They criticized, the Council on Justice and Peace criticized the International Monetary Fund in these words. They say the gradual decline in efficacy of the Bretton Woods institutions beginning in the early 1970s. In particular, the International Monetary Fund has lost an essential element for stabilizing world finance, and that is regulating the overall money supply and vigilance over the amount of credit risk taken on by the system. To sum it up, stabilizing the world monetary system is no longer a universal public good within the reach of the IMF. Okay, so the general responsibility, liberal economics, specifically the failure of the IMF and these other, really, these are the wreckage of Bretton Woods, because Bretton Woods worked fairly well, but now you've got the worst parts that have been saved and the better parts, the fixed parities, the gold convertibility, those have been dumped. So what do you do about it? Well, one big thing, the enactment of a financial transaction tax, what we might call a Tobin tax, Euro Tobin, here in the United States, a Wall Street sales tax. It doesn't mean a tax on your taking money out to an ATM. It means buying and selling, changes of ownership. And here's what this document says. Quote, it seems advisable to reflect, for example, on taxation measures on financial transactions through fair but modulated rates with changes proportionate to the complexity of the operations, especially those made on the secondary market. Such taxation would be very useful in promoting global development and sustainability according to the principles of social justice and solidarity, close quote. Now, there it is. The Council on Justice and Peace endorses the Tobin tax, the Wall Street sales tax, again, what the misguided ones term the Robin Hood tax, or the financial transaction tax, or trading tax, or other brand X names for this, but the Wall Street sales tax in the United States and Euro Tobin for Europe until we come up with something better, and it actually needs to be done in each language, and maybe we could work on that. But He's in favor of it. So that's, I think, a very important thing. All you people out there who are interested in making Wall Street pay, those of you who want to go beyond the whining and the complaining, the mewling and puking of Occupy Wall Street and the various impotent left liberal mushheads, redouble your efforts, because now you've got some new force has entered the field. It's clear that Ratzinger was not going to go out and do anything to strike against finance capital. This is one of the problems of coming from Germany, is that the country is dominated increasingly by the Deutsche Bank, right? Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank run Merkel, and she runs Germany. Germany dominates Europe, and that's the root of much sorrow. But now it's Argentina. And again, remember, this is a developing country, a third world country. This is a different world, and it's not just any developing country, but it's one of the developing countries, third world countries, with the best anti-imperialist tradition. So it's a whole different mental world. This is unprecedented, right? There's something good that has happened. No longer the effete, decadent, and degenerate representatives of the European post-industrial rubble field or the U.S. Imperial arrogant power. But now we're talking the third world. And the British were reporting, we're getting reports still, that Cameron is chewing the carpet. Cameron is having apoplectic fits because this Pope is on record saying Las Malvinas are property of Argentina, right? The so-called Falkland Islands. The Malvinas are an integral part of Argentina. And if you're an American out there, you call yourself an American, you better agree with that, because anything else violates the Monroe Doctrine. Does the Monroe Doctrine mean anything? Did it ever mean anything? It did. It is the handiwork of one of my favorite people, John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State for Monroe. The Monroe Doctrine, which is really the John Quincy Adams Doctrine, had some important meaning, and we can honor that meaning and John Quincy Adams by saying, yes, you're right, the Falkland Islands, the Malvinas, are an integral part of Argentina, and the British imperialists should get out. Not that we want to make this a big issue, but it simply it creates the proper atmosphere. Now, therefore, I'm appalled by the ignorance, the bigotry of some commentators who have come forward. Right, we know the big anti-Catholic trip was the property of the know-nothings, and God knows later the Ku Klux Klan was anti-Catholic if it was anything. And these humors still seem to be around. We'll get back in a minute and talk about some of the reactions. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything naturally at Tarpley.net and Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed during the conclave and other big events. When you want to keep up minute to minute, hour to hour, it's got to be Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed. At the same time, you want to take a look there at the, I think, very important, remains important book on Romney, Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. Romney came back out from under his rock, and he has reemerged, and that reminds us that those coup forces around Romney, the ones that were so active in the fall, all of those flag officers who got the boot somehow, right? Allen is now not going to become the NATO commander, thank goodness. Well, all of that is still in place. Some of the heads have been chopped off, but the Hydra is still there because it grows new heads. So pick up a copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. Order it through Tarpley.net. Now, concerning the couple of other things on the Vatican, since this is a big watershed event, there was the VatiLeaks scandal. The VatiLeaks, just like WikiLeaks, of course, was a stunt by Anglo-American intelligence, by CIA, MI6, and their banking community allies and spooks and this sort of undergrowth that goes with them. So this was, of course, the Pope's butler was blamed, but it was obviously much broader. It was a whole network. We want to focus in particular on the guy who's now Cardinal Harvey, the guy who hired the butler. This is a U.S. prelate from Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken. And he's incredibly, he didn't get fired. He should have been fired for recommending this butler, but instead he was promoted. So this network goes on. One of the most sensational documents in WikiLeaks was the report of a conversation supposedly held in the autumn of 2011 in Beijing, China, between Cardinal Paolo Romeo. This is a Vatican diplomat. He's the Archbishop of Palermo, Sicily. He is not a Jesuit himself, but he does have a degree from the Pontifical Gregorian University. Therefore, we can call him Jesuit trained. This Cardinal Romeo, in about November or so of 2011, told the Chinese government at a fairly high level that Ratzinger would be out of office. He would no longer be Pope a year later, so November 2012. Now, given the way this has usually happened over the last 600 years, it was not unreasonable for the Chinese government to conclude this meant that he was going to die. And what would that mean? Well, some of them apparently, or at some point in the doctoring or processing or whatever of this document, it got to the point where somebody commented, well, does that mean that the Pope was going to be assassinated? And of course, we see now in retrospect, this was an accurate report, essentially off by a few months at most, that Ratzinger was going to leave the papacy. Now, here's the question. Why would Romeo be telling the Chinese government, hey, heads up, there's going to be a new Pope? It's not recorded what else he said, but what he may have been saying is, look, Ratzinger is diplomatically hopeless. He is, as a German and for his academic foundation, he's too timid, he's too frightened, he's too much of an ivory tower guy to make the kind of diplomatic revolution we need, which is to end the subordination of the Vatican to the United States, which began under Pius XII in 1944, 45, 46 to 48. Pius XII did it. It's time to undo it. And together with that goes a big opening to China. Now, there are allegedly 12 million Catholics in China. It's probably a lot more. And if it were legal, it would be a lot more. And what they have there, of course, is a national Catholic church, which does not recognize the Vatican, but where the bishops are appointed by Beijing. And the big sticking point is the Pope wants to appoint the bishops, but the Beijing government wants to appoint the bishops. So this, they haven't been able to resolve. But you get the idea now. Will there be an opening to China? The opening to the third world is there, right? Bergoglio is the opening to Latin America, the third world, Africa, Asia, and so forth. How about China? Now, when Bergoglio appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica for the first time, the second sentence of the speech, he says, it was the duty of the conclave to choose a new bishop of Rome, and they chose one from almost the end of the world. Now, along comes Professor Filippo Mignini, expert in the history of philosophy, from the University of Macerata, southern Italy. He is quoted by Il Giornale, right-wing Berlusconi paper from Milan, and he says, look, this is a quotation from the Jesuit father Matteo Ricci. Matteo Ricci, missionary sent by Rome to the imperial Chinese court during the Ming Dynasty. He arrived in 1601. Ricci led a group of Jesuits who stayed at the Chinese court. They developed a very big interest of the Chinese emperor in steam engines, chronometers, telescopes, precision instruments, and so forth. They put European technology on display, and the Chinese emperor said basically, well, if that's the belief system that gives you these kinds of powerful inventions, then I'm interested. Unfortunately, Ricci and the Jesuits were cut off by the Dominicans and the Franciscans, who were very jealous of the success of the Jesuits. But now, what we see, essentially based on what this Professor Mignini says, is that in his first appearance, the new pope makes an opening to China. So there's something big afoot. Now, the yammering of the yelping detractors, right? Remember, the British have been at war with the Vatican for 500 years, since Henry VIII. Since the Gunpowder Plot, 1605, the British have been doubly at war with the Vatican. That's the British Empire. It won't change. But now we have our so-called leftists, or I don't know what, anti-regime forces, I don't know what they would call themselves. They come forward and say, oh, yeah, but wait a minute. There was the Argentine military junta of 1976 to 1983, and this guy Bergoglio was playing footsie with the junta. There were these two Jesuits who were arrested, and somehow it's this guy's fault. I don't know how this is done, but Bergoglio is responsible. He's not the junta. He's the provincial of the Jesuit order in Argentina, I believe. So anyway, what's the basis of this? First of all, remember, the Argentine junta was created by U.S. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. And remember, he was the one with the tremendous Latin American networks left over from World War II, the CIIA, Nelson Rockefeller World War II, Committee for Inter-American, Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, or whatever he was, top spook for Latin America. And at that point, Nelson was vice president in 1976. Secretary of State, unless I remember wrongly, was Henry Kissinger, who was also the top dog of the National Security Council. So we have secret State Department documents released in September 2002 that establishes the guilt of these characters beyond any doubt. So one of the Jesuits, who is supposed to have been betrayed by Bergoglio, has come forward to deny the charges. And we have a very authoritative person, Adolfo Perez Esquivel. This is a Nobel Prize winner, human rights activist, says Bergoglio is not one of the churchmen who collaborated with the dictatorship. So I wonder, what are these screwed-up commentators pushing the British CIA line against somebody who's obviously... Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So just to sum that up again, I think I got a little bit cut off. One of the Jesuits, supposedly betrayed by Bergoglio, comes forward to say, no, it's not true. This is a fake story. It comes from a guy called Horace Verbitsky. And it's funny, you go from Latin American country to Latin American country, you find figures like this guy, Horace Verbitsky, resident character assassins who are concerned with attacking people in the local elite. They're not concerned with fighting back against the imperialists, but they're interested in picking fights with people inside the country, which, of course, raises interesting questions about what they're up to. The big source is Horace Verbitsky, but the authoritative Adolfo Perez Esquivel, who is a Nobel Prize winner, he is the main human rights figure of this time in Argentina, says that there were some of the Catholic hierarchy who cooperated with the junta, but not Bergoglio. So I am asking the yelping detractors who come forward now, it should be obvious, right? The Washington Post, a week ago Friday, so in other words, this Pope was elected on Wednesday. They let Thursday go by. By Friday, we had Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post writing the big story about, those Jesuits that he betrayed. So they sound the charge, and all of the CIA assets and dupes across the world rush forward. So we don't need to go through the names because there's no need to glorify them. But all of these characters that are out there attacking Bergoglio, I think they're doing us all a severe disservice, and they're documenting that they are clueless in world geopolitics and the way things actually work. And it can also be that some of them are acting out this infantile anti-clericalism, right? The kind of sort of Saturday Night Live level of, baiting the Roman Catholic Church. They seem to get hit hard, whereas with others it's not so marked. So there we go. Now, to repeat though, what could go wrong? There's stuff that can go wrong. It's not what these people think. What can go wrong is it's all in the name of Francis, right? St. Francis of Assisi, great guy, many good things, but there is a modern attempt, and this was done by the Franciscans in the 80s and 90s with the so-called Mater Terra movement, Mother Earth. Get it? This is not part of Christianity. There's no Mater Terra in Christianity, but the Franciscans thought they discovered one for their own egotistical glorification. The idea is if you call yourself Francis, right, you're supposed to be at peace with the creatures and the animals and the creation, right, il creato, as we heard lately. There is an attempt to recast St. Francis as the patron saint of environmental fanatics, radical ecologists, and ultimately even green fascists. So you will find that the forces friendly to radical environmentalism, Agenda 21, will crowd around the new pope to try to influence him, to try to hijack the pontificate. One good example, Beppe Grillo, the right-wing Tea Party demagogue, who greeted the Pope with the claim that his movement, the Five-Star Movement, is the true heritage of St. Francis today, right? And, of course, Grillo is the embodiment of Agenda 21 in European politics. So watch out for them. That's where it could go wrong. And I have to say, in the inaugural speech by Francis I, he referred to the environment a number of times. Now, you just have to realize environment in the third world context, as in the past in the Eastern European or today in the Chinese context, it means something different. In other words, it means places where there's no Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, where human beings die, human beings are hurt by environmental crimes. This is not environment for the pelicans, the polar bears, and the penguins, but it's the environment as a toxic threat to human life. And here it's absolutely correct. So we have to watch that carefully and be alert at every point to push back against lunatics who are going to say, well, the real enemy of the well-being of the world is CO2 or something like this. This is where you have to draw the line. All right. Now, switching to the Middle East, if we look at Obama's trip to the Middle East, we get what looks like a pattern of reorganizing the encirclement of Syria. And we have to point in particular to the prominent presence of Ben Rhodes, right, the White House National Security Council communications honcho, who had such a big role in that anti-Syrian attack last summer, June, July, right, with especially the stress on fake television transmissions, interrupting the Syrian national television and replacing that with CIA-manufactured programming. Ben Rhodes' brother, said to be head of NBC News. We'll check that. Obama goes to meet Netanyahu. Hail, brother, well met. All kinds of camaraderie. But then, as soon as Obama is off to Jordan, Netanyahu calls Erdogan of Turkey and apologizes for the Nabi Marmara attack, the blatant attack by the Israelis on this humanitarian aid ship on the high seas, with 9 Turks getting killed by the Israelis. Netanyahu is now in the process of knitting up, closing the breach with Erdogan of Turkey. And it looks to me like that's saying, well, how are we going to deal with Syria if we're at each other's throats? We need to reorganize the cooperation of our military commands and other things. And then on to Jordan, which is just as much a part of the encirclement. So we've got Israel, we've got Turkey, we've got Jordan, and it looks like this is going to herald a new phase of aggressivity vis-a-vis Syria. And now we also, to put this together with the new leadership of the Syrian National Coalition, indeed now they call themselves Government in Exile. This is Hassan Hitto, Hitto. Hitto is the new imperialist Hitto man. The new Hitto man of Syria comes into power as the head of this country. Now, he, of course, is someone with very little relation to Syria. He's an IT technocrat, Dallas, Texas, almost no relation to Syria. He was born there, but after that, it's mostly Dallas, Texas, all the way. He's a Kurd. He's undoubtedly got huge U.S. intelligence community connections. But then at the same time, what happens? The Syrian government says that just at this, in the same time frame, the rebels begin to use chemical weapons near Aleppo. Perfectly plausible. There will be a UN investigation. Ban Ki-moon will send in his inspectors. Let's see what that's worth. But certainly, it's eminently believable that the death squads, especially if they're getting desperate, which they may be, then they would turn to chemical weapons. So this is near Aleppo. They turn around, of course, and say, no, you did it, we didn't do it, but quite likely the rebels. So that's on the one side. And then on the other side, a very sad event, the assassination of Dr. Mohammed Sayed Ramadan al-Bouti. So Dr. al-Bouti, the top Sunni cleric of Syria, the leader of the Sunnis of Syria from certain points of view, an internationally celebrated figure in the Muslim world. He was on a list of 500 of the most influential people in the Muslim world. He showed up as number 23. He was certainly a great religious leader, a great religious scholar, but a great Syrian nationalist. He operated at the Umayyad Mosque and at some other mosques, and he had, very early on in the rebellion, said, look, we have to support our Syrian national government, not these foreign fighters and foreign killers. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights tried to blame this on a stray mortar round, showing their lying proclivities. A couple of more words about Dr. Bouti, whom we join the Syrians in mourning. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. It's the 22nd of March here in Washington, D.C., and we are mourning the assassination of the distinguished Syrian Sunni cleric, Dr. al-Bouti, who was killed. I think some sources claim this is the first case of a suicide bombing entering a mosque. He was giving religious instruction to a group of young people. 42 of these young students were killed, and 100 or so severely wounded in this process. He had lashed out. Dr. Bouti had lashed out against the opposition as scum, and he had called on the Syrian population to help their army defeat this rebellion. His last sermon was in praise of the Syrian army for battling these mercenaries sent by the United States and the West. And his thesis was that Syria was targeted by a universal conspiracy. It was certainly a worldwide surreptitious covert operation that heads up to a universal conspiracy. Yes, indeed. Again, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said, it was probably just a stray mortar shell. The embarrassment of the backers, the fans of the death squads, is that they are clearly on the defensive that the death squads may have been the first to use chemical weapons on the one side, and without any doubt, the death squads are the ones who killed the top Sunni cleric. And the mourning for this cuts across the confessional lines. The Grand Mufti of Damascus, a very fine man, that's Dr. Hassouni, is leading the mourning, but he's joined by Archbishop Curie from the Patriarchate of Antioch, because remember, the Christians are also involved in this. So a good time for the depraved Western powers to back off. But they're doing the opposite. And what I think you can see here is that Obama does not intend for the U.S. to make the attack. Obama will be leading from behind. He'll be trying to maneuver, to con Turkey, Jordan, to some extent the Israelis, into being in the front line, whereas he provides various services, right? Various kinds of internet warfare, cyber warfare, video, television warfare, the kind of thing that Ben Rhodes is good at. So notice also Obama concerning the Palestinians, Obama's speech in Israel, all platitudes, the usual Obama, right? It's grandiloquent posturing, self-serving, purveying of platitudes, no specifics, and above all, Obama obligated to do absolutely nothing. So, and that's after, as some people have been saying, after 2 years of doing nothing, right? At the beginning, there was this abortive, fitful attempt by Obama to stop the settlements from growing. The Israelis turned on him. He backed off in fear, then did nothing, and now he's still doing nothing. And now it's obvious that the big issue was Syria, and that quite possibly the main thing that Obama wanted from Netanyahu for all this public charm offensive was Netanyahu, get on the phone with Erdogan, mend your differences so we can get on to the greater work, which is to overthrow the government of Syria finally. And the other thing they've got an eye on is Iran, right? In June, we're going to have the Iranian elections. It's been 4 years since the failed color revolution of June 2009. So all of that going on. And the drumbeat in the background, Netanyahu's constant growled threats. Netanyahu says nobody can deny the right of the Israelis to defend themselves by themselves. Well, I have no comment on that, but that is not what he's proposing. He is proposing what his proposition really is nobody can deny the right of the Israelis to drag the United States into a disastrous war, a regional war, maybe a world war, at any time of the choosing of Israel. And don't you dare, anybody in the U.S., tell us that we can't do that because we have the right. So self-defense, one thing, unilateral action, deplorable, but still another thing. But what is involved here is that this parade of pathetically weak American presidents and secretaries of state cringing before the power of AIPAC have delegated this authority to the Israelis. So they've given up a part of U.S. sovereignty. Not a pretty picture. Now let's push on to the world financial crisis, and this has centered on Cyprus, right? The former British colony there in the eastern Mediterranean. The European Central Bank and the European Union, on one level, appear to have gone collectively insane with their idea that the way to bail out these three Cypriot banks is to begin stealing money from savings accounts, including the savings accounts under 100,000 euros, which are theoretically insured or supposed to be practically insured. So it's a so-called tax, a forced loan, if you will, on the contents of the savings accounts of the Greek, of the Cypriot banks. This is all Greek, the Greek part of Cyprus. Needless to say, there's another part which is under the control of Turkey, which doesn't seem to be part of this. But this is now part of the European Union, and the word is, they want 6%, 7%, 10%, 12% of your savings account, even though you thought it was insured against all loss, that you thought that you were guaranteed the return of principal, and you were willing to give up return on principal to get that. Now, are they really that crazy? This would be Draghi at the European Central Bank and Barroso at the European Commission. I don't think they're that crazy. It seems to me, and this is an important thesis, we'll be talking about it more and more, this can well be the self-demolition of the European Union. In other words, an attempt to destroy the thing from within. It's hard to interpret it in any other way. The idea that you're going to steal people's savings accounts is a recipe to provoke panic runs on banks in every other European country. Now, who could they be targeting? Well, the ones that they don't like are obvious. First of all, Cyprus in this case, because Cyprus is the home of Russian money, all kinds of Russian citizens from industrial corporations to organized crime interests, sure, just like anybody else. They have their money in Cyprus. So Merkel is reported to be interested in getting the Russians out of Cyprus because through Cyprus, Russia has some toehold in the policy making of the European Union. And that's more important now than it was because that was the role of Berlusconi. Berlusconi, friend of Putin, provided the Russians with a significant window and voice into the councils of the European Union. Now, that is gone for the moment. And I think part of this thing with Cyprus is to make sure that it does not return. So there's the Italian situation is also immediately implied here, as well as Cyprus and Greece, because sometime this year, in the spring, in the summer, it's quite possible that there will be early elections in Greece, at which point the Syriza bloc might be a candidate. So that seems to reflect some attempt by the European Commission, by, again, Barroso, Draghi, Merkel, to try to come to a resolution here. Either you kick the Russians out of Cyprus or you kick Cyprus out of the European Union. Now, that is an enterprise fraught with peril. And whatever else we can say, the danger of a panic run on the bank in Southern Europe and indeed all of Europe is now very high. It's higher than it was, to be sure. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. The crisis in Cyprus, the either collective insanity or collective self-sabotage of the Eurogarchs. We'll see what emerges now. It's the European Central Bank very much out in front. The ultimatum comes from the European Central Bank, i.e. Draghi acting as a frontman for Merkel, Schäuble, and some others, right? Deutsche Bank. There would be a very good reason for Cyprus to go to the brink. Brinksmanship. The secret of this is, as John Foster Dulles might have said, go to the brink and then see what happens. The problem is that in many places like Greece, if you drive Greece into national bankruptcy, Deutsche Bank takes an immediate hit. That may be somewhat less in the case of Cyprus. In the case of Cyprus, the hit seems to go to the Russians. However, Russia today declined to intervene. Maybe they want a better deal. Maybe also they're just afraid of derivatives debt, because derivatives, as the London whale reminds us once again, the potential for losses with derivatives is infinite. There is no limit. It's not you can't just lose 100%. You can lose 10,000 or 20,000%. It just never ends. So here's what I would recommend. Suppose you're a Cyprus patriot. Here's what you should do. First of all, stand and fight. Don't leave the euro. Why should you leave the euro? You can't be bankrupt and be a European at the same time? That's crazy. Lots of European countries have defaulted repeatedly. What's the big deal? What you need is, first of all, to keep your social safety net going, a euro Tobin at the level of 1%. Now, there's one thing we should have celebrated right at the beginning. Italy has now implemented the euro Tobin. The euro Tobin is being collected in Italy as of the first week of March. Italy expects to get about a billion euros out of that, and that's just for starters, and that's a very small euro Tobin. Every country can do their own. So why doesn't Cyprus go for a euro Tobin at 1%. The other thing you ought to do, obviously, is since you're under attack using credit default swaps, ban credit default swaps and do that with a long reach in the same way that the European countries are designing the Euro Tobin to reach into foreign exchanges, any securities issued by any entity in Cyprus, and the offshore operations of any Cyprus entity have to be hit by a ban on credit default swaps. But the obvious thing here to do is to declare an immediate debt moratorium, follow in the footsteps of these great countries, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. Stay in the euro. Why leave the euro? Get the benefits of being in the euro. You're part of Europe. You're Cyprus. You're Greek. So stay in the euro. Go for a debt moratorium, a debt freeze. It simply means that for 5 years or the duration of the world economic depression, whichever lasts longer, according to you, then you're not going to pay interest and principal. And then turn your gaze on Draghi and say, Draghi, thank you very much for the hundreds of billions of euros you're now freeing up for a program of infrastructure and industrial development, as well as tourism and some other things that can go with it, archaeology and discovery and all those other things that would make this a big destination. Thank you for financing the recovery, right? We got the situation where the European countries are so poor and the European Central Bank is so rich. Isn't it time to scoop a little out of the coffers of Draghi, who, after all, can invent money as much as he wants, out of thin air? It's obvious that Cyprus has gone too far down the sort of Icelandic road. Right now, bank deposits in Cyprus are 7 times the gross domestic product. That's looking a bit like Iceland. That is not. It's just not viable. Now, we've had the coming of Chinese President Xi to Moscow for meetings with Putin, and this also it relates to the two stories we've just done. It relates to Syria in the sense of Putin and Xi need to come up with an intervention in favor of Syria now. Do it now. If you don't do it now, Putin and Xi, chaos may well engulf the Middle East over the next few months, because you're looking at the new attempt now, masterminded by Obama leading from behind with Ben Rhodes, to overthrow the government of Syria and then move on to Iran. They will be next. Either a color revolution in June and or an attack on the nuclear centrifuges, right? The enrichment that goes together with a peaceful nuclear program. So that's the one side. The other thing is we are told that the BRICS Development Bank is rolling along. In other words, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they are developing their own development bank. It is an alternative to the International Monetary Fund. Get that thing going. That's what you need for Cyprus. So the timetable for this would have to be accelerated to match the speed of the imperialists. But it's good to see that it's going at all. And when you hear people talking about creating international institutions alternative to the IMF, that's a very positive sign. Now, switching back to the U.S. for a minute, we've had a very interesting study put out now, and this is something that doesn't happen all the time. We're talking about the American Society of Civil Engineers. The American Society for Civil Engineers periodically does a report card on the U.S. national infrastructure. They've done this in 1998, and you'll see that reflected in my Surviving the Cataclysm, 2001, 2005, 2009. So now it looks like it's every 4 years. Here it is, 2013. So what do? They assess the critical infrastructure of the United States, meaning roads, we should really say superhighways, freeways, expressways, roads, bridges, drinking water systems, mass transit systems, schools, and systems for energy delivery. And their finding is, and has been, that the decay of U.S. critical infrastructure may soon fail to meet the needs of society. Okay? Since 1998, ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers, felt an obligation to make a report on the state of infrastructure to show that we are not, repeat, not making the necessary investments to improve it, and not even making some of the investments we need to make to maintain what we have. So what they've done with this is the grade goes from a D to a D plus. D to... Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So, looking through the very useful and very welcome report by the American Society of Civil Engineers, we get, I think, the dimensions of the economic problem we face, but also the opportunity that we have to use this now for political organizing. Right? It's the first one of these report cards in 4 years. Some things have gotten better, and where they've done so, it's because of federal spending, to be sure, the Obama stimulus and the supplemental, I guess call it the Obama supplemental, that went through, hidden among so much in the way of tax cuts and, some, other things that did not bear on these great projects or critical infrastructure. There was enough to get it up from D to D plus, according to these civil engineers. They are looking at categories. They have aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water, energy, hazardous waste, inland waterways, levees, ports, public parks and recreation, rail, highways, schools, solid waste, transit, wastewater. So they have committees of civil engineers working on this. Generally, the overall grade goes from D to D plus. The bridges of the United States went up from C to C plus, reflecting the fact that some structurally deficient bridges have been repaired. But now here's the bottom line. Out of this report card comes the estimate that over the next, 7 years, until 2020, from now to 2020, the United States would need to spend $3.6 trillion, $3.6 thousand billion. $3.6 trillion is your infrastructure spending target from 2013 to 2020. That would get you to an acceptable grade. Now, I don't know what an acceptable grade is. I have to look into this in more detail. Usually, C is passing. So if you want to go from D to C, you got to spend $3.6 trillion. Suppose you wanted to go to A, right? How about the American exceptionalists? Where are you? Can't we have an A? Can't we even have a B? Well, what would that look like, right? If the acceptable grade, passing grade, would cost you $3.6 trillion. Now, here's what I propose. Let us take this study and grab a hold of it with both hands and our teeth and use this to beat the Congress and the ruling class and everybody else over the head and say, look, Ben Bernanke, you now have less than 1 year at the Fed. We demand the opening of an infrastructure recovery window, and we can put somebody's name on it, right? We'll decide the name when it comes to getting the last critical vote in the Congress, in the House or the Senate. Somebody can get their name on there, but we got to call it something. It's going to be a credit stimulus window, and we demand $3.6 trillion of 0%, 100-year federal credit to rebuild at least to the level of avoiding the collapse. We want to get to a C, And after that, we want to move on to a B and an A and an A plus, right? If we're real chauvinists out there, let's let somebody get out there and demand an A plus and demand that the Federal Reserve pays for it. They pay. And, of course, pay means extend 0% century bonds, buy the 0% century bonds that will be issued by the various municipalities and regional authorities that will do this. And now we have a figure. Rather than coming up with our own figure, we can come up with this one. Now, the one or two things within the figure. They say that, according to the Society of Civil Engineers, they say that it is projected that $2 trillion of this will already be provided. In other words, it's expected that out of this $3.6 trillion that you would need to get to C, I guess, that $2 trillion is already thought to be in the pipeline. There are no guarantees of that. Take a look at Rand Paul. Suppose you get President Rand Paul, the senator from Austria. Suppose we get the senator from Gusanos, Rubio. Suppose we get President Christie of New Jersey, who won't build the tunnel under the Hudson River. That is fraught with peril. So what I would say is, in order to relieve pressure on other budgets, this is an area where the 0% long-term federal credit provided by the nationalized part of the Fed can come in handy. We can relieve pressure on state and local and authority budgets so that they can use their tax revenues for other things, rehire your teachers, your firemen, your policemen, your health workers, and others. Let's put all of this on the Federal Reserve. So we now have a very authoritative figure. What is the size of the credit stimulus, the infrastructure window that we are demanding that Bernanke open up at the Federal Reserve? It is $3.6 trillion. That is what we need. We might as well get it out now because the stuff has got to be shovel ready. It's got to be going by 2020. And we do that, again, to relieve some pressure on those other budgets. And this is not a figure that we have pulled out of thin air, but the eminently respectable and authoritative American Society for Civil Engineering. So we now know what the first tranche should be. It would take the form of a tender offer where Chairman Bernanke of the Federal Reserve states, I am opening this window. I invite states, cities, counties, other government authorities, Port Authority, other things. I want you to come forward and offer me bonds. I will buy them. The strictures are Davis-Bacon, union wages, $3.6 trillion worth is going to be bought in the first go-round. Now, to bring this home, right, here in the very backyard of the nation's capital, here we are in the rich suburb of Chevy Chase. And in Chevy Chase, Maryland, we had a 30-foot geyser of water. It was about 1/8 of the average water consumption per day from the Potomac River for the entire Washington metropolitan area. 60 million gallons of water went onto the streets of Chevy Chase, and it played hell with the traffic. And we now have 1.8 million people in Montgomery County and Prince George's County. These are the two northern or Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. You're supposed to take shorter showers, fewer loads of laundry, fewer uses of the dishwasher, flush the toilet less frequently, and so forth. The Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission is doing the repairs. They're working around the clock, but you get the idea. This is an obsolete system. And another figure, this is a subset of what we were just talking about. Another entity called the American Water Works Association. They have a study from last year, from 2012. They say over the next 25 years, the United States would need to spend $1 trillion on water pipes, buried pipes, water supply infrastructure. This does not include the facilities to prepare potable water, not drinking water treatment, nor is it waste disposal or sewage treatment. It's just the pipes, $1 trillion over the next 25 years. So that goes in. We'll factor that in to the $3.6 trillion. I think it's already included. So you get the idea. This is the magnitude. Where can these monies come from? The Federal Reserve must pay. They must cough up. Back in a minute. We'll come back to World Crisis Radio. So that's what we're demanding. Bernanke, we want $3.6 trillion in 0% 100-year federal credit. It goes exclusively into the categories of infrastructure studied by the American Society of Civil Engineers. We're factoring in the $1 trillion from the American Waterworks Association. This is the price of maintaining human life as we have known it. Now, some other things in our concluding segment. Food stamps. Very interesting story in the Washington Post this week. The impact of food stamps on local communities. The Washington Post did an in-depth study of the local economy in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Now, these are places that used to run on textile mills, light industry, and other kinds of economic activity. These are now depressed areas. And the only thing that keeps a lot of people in Woonsocket, Rhode Island going is a $2 million monthly infusion from food stamps. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. We have almost 50 million Americans on SNAP. The cost to the federal government has gone from $24 billion in 2003 to about $78 billion in 2012. Needless to say, reactionary Republican fascists are seeking a massive cut. They want to cut about $30 billion out of that. The Wall Street Democrats want to take it slower, $5 to $10 billion, I think. We're waiting for Rand Paul to come out with his budget. Will little Rand follow in the footsteps of his father? Because Ron Paul, sure enough, wanted to cut 62 to 63% out of that $78 billion cost of keeping 50 million Americans alive. And what you see here is that these people get paid every 4 weeks. They go out, they try very hard to get the best deal they can, to buy bulk, to buy at the cheapest places. They take the bus, they go from one store to another to get the best possible rates on bulk purchases of food, but they can't make it to the end of the month. And for many of them, the last week of the month is a time of ramen noodles and rice and pasta and very little else. So we're talking again pellagra, rickets, scurvy, and other vitamin deficiency diseases. Now, the existing political parties could not be more bankrupt. The answer to this situation of 50 million people on food stamps is to create 30 million plus new productive jobs. That's what we want. We were just discussing part of the way to get that in the previous segments, right? You got to rebuild infrastructure. You start your capital goods recovery with the infrastructure budget. We want $3.6 trillion immediately from the Fed to kickstart the entire recovery. You do that, then you begin to draw down these food stamp rolls, no doubt about that. But the other approach, to start by cutting the food stamp rolls, that's genocide. That's a hanging offense at Nuremberg, high crime against humanity under the Nuremberg statutes. Anybody who's a part of that, well, they should get their lawyer. They should lawyer up for their trip to Nuremberg, where something very unpleasant may be awaiting them. So these are now the issues. We'll of course talk more. We've now got the fascisto Republicans have passed once again the Ryan budget, and we will compare that to the Patty Murray Senate Democratic budget, and we will compare it to the Progressive Caucus budget, because there were things to avoid and things to adopt, I'm sure, out of all of those. But this is it's a bad time. So we need continuing vigilance. And again, the key to the domestic situation is now go out there and say, not just Italy has the Wall Street sales tax, not just Germany, France, and the 11 European Union countries, not just the AFL-CIO, the UAW, the National Nurses United. The National Nurses United will be here at Morrow Park in Washington, D.C. on the 20th of April. Looking forward to that. I'm sure they'll be out there for what is really the Wall Street sales tax, the Robin Hood tax. Maybe they can phase out that unfortunate name bequeathed by some very shady characters, I'm sure. Get out there and fight for the Wall Street sales tax. Make it a full percent. Don't be shy, right? Let those hedge fund hyenas pay their share. And then we have to remember also we've got the city of Detroit under fascist dictatorship, and at the on April 3rd at the NAACP Washington office, we're going to be joining Reverend Edward Pinkney of Benton Harbor, Michigan, who is the lead man in fighting against the imposition of these little Hitlers in Michigan. One or two words maybe about Beppe Grillo, the Italian Tea Party, as he's known now. Remember, Grillo is somebody who wants to wipe out unions and to drastically lower pensions. I got email from somebody saying, "Oh, you don't understand the issues." I understand them all too well. Grillo has to be reckoned as a neo-fascist. His faction chief, his representative there in the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Roberta Lombardi, says that original fascism, I guess she means the fascism of Piazza San Sepolcro, was a good thing. Well, and also his flirtation with Casa Pound, the Italian neo-fascist political party, also unspeakable. Remember now, Grillo has been endorsed by David Thorne, the U.S. ambassador to Rome. He has been endorsed by Jim Allen of Goldman Sachs, who at the same time that he endorsed Grillo is dumping Italian bonds and buying bets against Italy using credit default swaps. One of Grillo's points has been net roots democracy, radical democracy, everything with a referendum, everything broadcast. Well, of course, he doesn't broadcast anything now that he's got people in the parliament. Last Saturday, there was a vote in the Italian Senate. Who should be the president of the Italian Senate? There was a Berlusconi candidate by the name of Schifano and a PD or Social Democratic candidate by the name of Grasso. And Grillo, speaking through his hat, talking through his hat as he usually does, told his myrmidons, vote blank ballot. Don't let the majority emerge, so we'll block anybody being named. So blank ballot was the order, but about 15 of Grillo's senators voted for Grasso, whom they thought was clearly superior to the Berlusconi candidate. At this point, Grillo went apoplectic, and he said, "How dare you? I want everybody to tell me how they voted, and if you didn't vote the way I demanded, then you have to quit. I'll expel you. Out you go." Grillo had already said that he regretted that the Italian Constitution gave control of the seats in Parliament to the people actually elected and not to the party which caused them to be elected. He is clearly a neo-fascist, totalitarian thinker. And he got a tremendous backlash against this on his blog. Up to now, Grillo's blog has been a celebration of this unsavory, scurrilous demagogue. But now it was counterattacks, people telling him, you have a delirium of omnipotence, you are a petty bourgeois, you are, well, all manner of stuff. So the response of Grillo of this was, out of about 10,000 posts on his blog, he censured, removed about 2,500 of these blog posts. And then that gave him another round, another cascade of very angry emails saying, how dare you, Grillo and Casaleggio and you nameless ones, how dare you remove these examples of grassroots democracy from your blog. Now, here in the United States, there's a race to see who's going to be the Grillo of the coming season. Watch this character, Dr. Ben Carson. This is the Johns Hopkins medical doctor who appeared at the National Prayer Breakfast and told Barkey to his face that he didn't like Obamacare and he wanted it rolled back and there were too many taxes and the deficit was too big. That guy is being groomed by Limbaugh and others to be a new Beppe Grillo. We are in the season of Beppe Grillos. Demagogues, populists, pujadistes, qualunquisti coming out from under the rock and posing their demagogic solutions. So we have to be ready to denounce these things. They are new forms of color revolution and nothing but. We don't want any part of it. Certainly not Rand and not Dr. Ben Carson. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.